Well, here's something you don't see every day. I've certainly never seen one before. It's a Retina IIIC camera, big C. But there's a difference. Long after the manufacturing of the Retina IIICs had finished, a batch was made for special sale, and I think they were all sold to Kodak executives. They were made up out of spare parts. So they differed subtly to the run-of-the-mill Retina IIIC cameras. So this is the first time I've had a chance to look at one, and this one here of course is here for servicing. And I've heard that there are differences with them, and I'm just checking them out to see what I can see. I can see some interesting differences, a couple that I'd heard about and a couple that I hadn't. So, how does it compare? Well, I don't have a Retina 3 Big C camera of this particular vintage. In fact, my Retina 3 Big C camera is one of the ugliest cameras on the planet, and there's a story with that. But I do have a Retina 1B camera of the same vintage as the last of the Retina 3Cs. And how did they differ from the earlier models? Well, the earlier models, here's an example. You can see that there's a moulding line in the top cover here, and that would have acted as a stiffening rib as much as anything else. It was a feature. And in the later cameras they did away with it, so it's entirely smooth along the front there. You lacks that moulding line that ran along the top of the window. The backs remain much the same. But otherwise, these two cameras were quite similar. Same leatherettes, same finish as far as I could tell, same exposure meter, and the 3 Big Cs had the same exposure meter as the 1Bs. This one, this special, what differences can I see? Well, I think probably one of the things that really stands out, and you may not pick it so much in the pictures, is look at that top cover. That's not a satin chrome like this. It's a shiny chrome, and the closest I've got to that would be this one, which was a repair top that was made probably much later after the Retinas had finished being manufactured. And you can see it's very bright and shiny. And this special 3C has a bright and shiny top. It's not quite as shiny, it's got a bit of satin finish to it, but it's not the duller satin finish of the run-of-the-mill Retina 3C cameras. Other features. Well, I'm having a quick look at the exposure meter, see if that tells me anything entertaining. I can see that the ASA rating runs up to 3200 there, and on my 1B of vaguely similar vintage, 3200, so it's the same maximum film speed there in the meter. The meter window, same black plastic surround, same honeycomb window, except the honeycomb window here has the word Gossin embossed in it on the inside. It's on the inside of the honeycomb. So you've got to know to look for it to see it's there. That's definitely the case. Serial numbers. Well, traditionally your serial number on the Retinas was here, behind the accessory shoe, and in this fashion here. And on this particular camera there's no serial number in there at all. So where is the serial number on this model? Well, it's actually embossed into the leatherette. here on the back. That's the only serial number. Anything else of note? What about the accessory shoe? Is that the same? It might be brighter chrome, or it might just be that my example's a bit ugly. But the accessory shoe looks pretty similar to me. It's certainly brighter chrome. I would say that's much of a muchness. The rewind knob and film reminder dial, well, there's nothing particularly obvious about that that would point out that there was a difference there. Everything else looks about right. Base of the camera, nothing exciting to see there. This is in quite tidy condition, of course. It's probably been in people's collection cupboards for the last 50 years. Anything unusual to be seen with the lens? Not really. I'm not even sure that the serial number is that unusual. No, I wouldn't have thought so. It's probably an earlier lens that was old stock and was sitting in the cupboard forever. So, this could be an interesting camera. A little bit of grime on the base here. I don't know what that brown stuff is. Let's hope it's chocolate. Inside the camera, at the back. Well, there's certainly nothing staring at me there which screams that this is an odd one. I think the answer, any other differences are probably going to be revealed as I take the camera apart for servicing, I would think. But anyhow, a very rare camera. I'm not sure how many were made. I'll go and check that up. From the McCullen's Guide, Retina IIIC, type 028/N, 1977. New type Retina IIIC cameras were hand assembled in 1977 from leftover spare parts. Approximately 100 to 125 cameras were made. These cameras were made to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Kodak AG in Germany. They were never marketed but were gifts to Kodak VIPs. Right. And that's pretty much all it tells me. Oh, except it was suggesting that it has a very high value. Of course, the McCullen's is a bit outdated now because that dates back almost before the time that we all got onto eBay and could access anything we wanted at any time at all and have choices. So there we are, a very rare Retina, one of 125 perhaps. I wish it was in my collection, but unfortunately it's not. And I don't think I'm ever going to have the money together in one place to be splashing out on something like this, and if I did, I certainly wouldn't be able to tell my wife. Well, I'll start taking this camera apart. I'll start with the meter dials here. That screw was unusually tight. This camera has probably seen very little use, if at all. It's quite possible it's never been used. Now it does have a bit of patina to it, I'd say you'd say. It's a bit grubby looking on the top here. Let's see if I can get that knob off. Why is this knob not lifting? It shouldn't be stuck with anything. It may be stuck with a bit of dried grease. Yeah, that's interesting. That shouldn't be stuck. Right. A little drop of naphtha on there, I think, and I'll be a bit cautious about it. Here we go. Just stuck with dried grease. The rewind knob. That usually doesn't put up any fight either. That came off. I'm looking to see if there's anything unusual going on. I noticed that the strap lug's knocked in. You can see the angle of that strap lug, that's definitely pushed in. That'll have to be pulled back out. The whole camera is relatively grimy. I don't know whether it's been sitting in display cases for the last number of years or not. So the top cover's off. Anything unusual to be seen in there? Not especially. The exposure meter. Hang on, what's this? That's the rubber buffer from inside the top cover that would have held down the exposure meter right at this end. That's just come unglued. It looks like it was displaced. It looks like it hasn't been sitting in there correctly. The exposure meter should just lift out. It does. And I presume that's a... Well, it says these cameras are made up from spare parts, so I presume that quite possibly some late model spare parts look just like that, but I'm not 100% on that. What do we see here? Nothing especially unusual. Now I do notice one thing that catches my attention. That little presence of that little washer is common with a lot of 3Cs. I'll remove the screws from the strap plug at the other end of the top while I'm here. I'll lift that trim off completely. The rangefinder, rangefinder held in place with 2 screws. Nothing really hits me between the eyes about it being any different there than usual. Move the screws that hold the strap down, which holds the cocking rack down. Some of these screws are tighter than I would normally expect. Now, it may just be that that's because they've been undisturbed for a very long time, but I think it's much more likely that the camera was assembled, as we know from spare parts, and it probably didn't run down the production line. It was probably hand assembled by perhaps one person. And it may well be that that person had a bit of a heavy hand, although making exceptionally sure that stuff stayed done. Now, here's our cocking rack. Oh yes, there's one obvious difference here from production line cameras. I'll mention that later. I can certainly see something. The shutter release should have a spring in underneath it. It does. We'll recover that later, so I can lift that out. Remove that clip. Remove the screw from the top of the release lever. Now that spring is a bit misshapen. Quite possibly you could say that was casually misshapen. It was perhaps someone had trouble tucking that down in place correctly. Now this post that I'm taking out of here, this screw, shoulder screw, that comes in 2 flavours. This one's known as a service replacement. The width of that ledge there is narrower. In other words, the head of the screw is larger, and it was used to hold racks more closely in contact with the gear here in cases where there was excessive play. Right, that might do for the moment, and I will flip the camera over and start working on the bottom. Right, where was that camera I was comparing things to? This bracket here, the cover for the back catch release. You might notice that's very bright chrome. Usually it's not as bright as that. So that stands out as a difference. Why should that be the case? I couldn't really tell you. there was certainly a change in the way things were manufactured and the finishes chosen towards the end of the life of Kodak Retina cameras. That return spring, it doesn't look particularly unusual. I'd say it's a bit less buggered up than most of them I find. I'm not sure why that should particularly be the case. The leatherette. Right, that film advance lever. I would have to compare that with a 3C of similar, of the last of the 3Cs. Certainly with that head style, the earlier cameras didn't have that head style. It's something I more associate with Reflex S and similar cameras. That screw head there is jammed up with adhesive and possibly corrosion. It's a bit brown looking. Oh, that's very, very reluctant to come off. Okay. I will find a better screwdriver than that, and I will take great care to get that thing loose. First to make sure that the groove is clear. You can certainly tell that it didn't run down the normal production line. I would have to say that the assembly work is not consistent, I suppose you'd say. Not consistent. When you have a team of people doing the same job day in, day out, they have certain routines, certain ways of doing things, and the products come out, for better or worse, they come out pretty much exactly the same. This sort of thing, the way that leatherette was glued down, sort of inconsistencies. It's like it was a one-off. It's like it was being done by someone who doesn't normally do that job. That's it. That screw is now loose. Of course, glue is not normally holding screws in like this. Because you put a little bit of adhesive on the leatherette typically, and then you apply the adhesive. You do not put the adhesive on the metal and then put the leatherette on. Right, so the leatherette on the base. There's a lot of loose grease here. A little bit of naphtha perhaps. Let's see if that helps. It certainly does. The adhesive used here is not adhesive that would have been used in production of the normal Retina 3Cs. it's something much more similar to what I'm using when I'm servicing cameras. Notice the adhesive certainly reacts to the naphtha and softens up. It's much more normal for the adhesive to be quite dry and hard and brittle, not at all like this. This is what I would expect to find on a camera that had been repaired at a later date and new leatherettes had been fitted. That's pretty ugly, but that's just the adhesive that's been used. I'll scrape off most of those lumps and bumps before I put this back together. I do expect that that adhesive will clean away fairly well from that base of the camera with a bit of naphtha. Let's find out if I'm correct. Well, naphtha's not exactly melting that away rapidly, but I'd say that that other solvent I used, that CRC Electroclean, likely will dissolve that away. Let me inspect these screws. It's a bit bright looking, that screw. I could almost be forgiven for thinking that that might be chrome plated. Normally, of course, these screws would be nickel plated. Take that plate off. Alright, now we can drop out the release lever. And the release lever that is definitely in a late style. I'm not sure whether the late 3Cs had one that looked quite like that. May well have done. There's our lock lever. The lock lever's job is to hold the film advance lever locked if the frame counter has reached number 1. Now I need to remove the rewind button from the base of the camera.